First, I want to thank Atheist Alliance and Chuck Vanderai and Bobby Kirkhart for inviting me to get to talk to you. And then I want to condemn them for making me go after Paula and Andy. I am a huge fan of science. Nova does a wonderful job of helping us to enlighten ourselves. Andy is a great speaker. Always, I've heard him 3 or 4 times, always different, always new, and always fascinating, interesting, stimulating. I feel closer to Andy now that I know that he and I are both Neanderthals. And I'm delighted that he's given me a further justification when I have to explain myself to Diane, but apparently it's the Neanderthal that can't see that gallon of milk on the top shelf. I don't know why. But I am very, very grateful to a lot of folks. I'm grateful to Gabriel McDonald, who gave us a ride from the airport last night. Really interesting fellow. I'm sorry he's not here today. But I think this is wonderful to have. I'm not going to give you any science or poetry like Paula did, and I'm not going to give you any science like Andy did, and I regret that. I'm going to give you politics and history and that sort of thing. Foretaste of maybe what you will hear more of from Edwina later, and from people like Mr. Shemp, or Shemp, who's going to speak tomorrow. And also, this is related in some ways to an article that's in the Secular Nation, that's in your goodie basket. I haven't read it yet, but it's an article on secularism versus atheism, and that's really what our book is about. As you might have guessed, a major purpose of this talk is to sell you the book. So I need to tell you a little bit more about it. It is not a defense of atheism. It's from an atheist perspective, and it will not teach you good arguments for deploying when you're trying to persuade somebody that they should give up their religion. But it is from our perspective, it will be something that you will identify with. But it is intended to give you really good, well-documented arguments for the history and the logic that go with defending the whole idea of secularism, of keeping religious ideas out of government decisions. And this, I would argue that this is America's great gift to the world. This is the basis that we Americans should have real pride in American exceptionalism. Not that God stuck his finger down here and created this country with all of its flaws and faults, but that we persuaded the world that government should not be in the business of religion, and that it's dangerous to both if it is. And the history of this is very, very complicated. My son and I spent, somebody asked me how long we spent writing this book, and I don't know. It goes back at least 10 or 15 years to lots and lots of letters to the editor, lots of hearing arguments that this is a Christian nation, a majority of people in the country are Christians, so it must be a Christian nation. The majority of the people in the country are women. Is this a female nation? A majority, a big majority so far, are identified as Caucasians. Is this a white nation? I know there's some people who want to say that it is, but I would argue vigorously that it is not, and that we need to argue against those kinds of things, and to argue against the fact that it is a Christian nation, even while we defend the freedom of people to choose to be Christians, and even while a majority of them, they mean awfully different things by it when they say, I'm a Christian. You get people who vigorously, violently disagree with each other, they both say they're Christians, and that's okay. I don't want the government to be involved in deciding between those very different points of view. And that is the basis, the true basis of secularism. So our book, which is available for sale in the bookstore, plug, 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 is a defense of secularism. It's not really written for you. And so even though I mentioned that I really would like for you to have it as a resource when you are writing letters to the editor or arguing with somebody at the water cooler. One of the great happy things about the development of the book happened with a 14-year-old girl And it's not really intended for 14-year-olds unless they're really bright, but she happens to be really bright. She is my wife and our grandniece. And she, I don't know that she chose the topic or whether it was assigned to her, but at about the time the book came out, she undertook a paper in school on whether this is a Christian nation. And she got a copy of our book in the mail, because we sent it to relatives. And she cited the book 4 or 5 times. She got an A on her paper. And so our paper's already been cited in an academic, our book's already been cited in an academic paper, which is really important. Her teacher asked her, "Where did you get this book?" She said, "The author sent it to me." I was delighted at that response from her, and she and her family are believers. So the article in the magazine says that we atheists need to be much more aware of persuading and defending and supporting secularists, not all of whom are atheists. And I fully agree with that. I haven't read the article, so I can't, I think it's by A.J. Johnson. I can't say whether it's well written or well developed, only because I haven't read it. But I like the thesis of the article, and I encourage you to be aware of the need to develop these arguments. We need to understand something about our history. We're in Boston, well, we're in Waltham, which as I understand it is the home of Brandeis University. And Brandeis is the home of Paula. It's also the home of the current president of American Atheist Educational. I don't know where he was born, but he was educated at Brandeis, and that is a wonderful gift to the atheist movement. And as Dave Silverman is a superb president. This area, Boston and the greater Boston area, is part of the American Revolution. And what we tend to forget, I know when we argue with the Christian nation mythologists that I forget this sometimes. The Orthodox Christians of the American Revolutionary era were pretty likely to be against the revolution that occurred. I don't mean it was uniform, but they were more likely to be. If they were truly Bible-believing Christians, the Bible, and it's worth checking and remembering that you don't have to take things out of context, you don't have to twist the Bible to find strong support there in the Bible, Old Testament and New, for slavery, strong support for keeping women in their proper place, which is subordinate to men. This is not some random verse taken out of context. This is the general sense of the Old and especially the New Testament, that women are not to teach men, not to have superior positions to men. The Bible, and the King James Version in particular, which is the one that was favored by the pro-English pastors and preachers at the time of the Revolution, was designed to be a translation that supported secular power, not secular, political power, by entangling it more thoroughly with the church. The King George III was the King of England, but he was also the head of the English church. And the King James Bible, I will read you one Bible quote, because this one is really directly relevant. He would have used the King James Version. I'm not going to use the King James Version because it's kind of hard to read and hard to listen to with our modern ears. This happens to be, I think, the International Revised Version. Romans 13:1. Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. So if you're going up against King George III and you want a revolution, you are going against the Bible. And you are going against at least an orthodox or fundamental version of Christianity. And if we had now a Christian nation, a nation that was governed on Christian principles, we would be more likely to have slavery. Now, Christians were certainly involved in the abolition of slavery. They fought hard against it. but Christians were also involved, especially in my part of the world. You can maybe tell from my accent that I'm not from Boston. But in my part of the world especially, but even to some extent, and some of this is covered in the book too, to some extent even in the North, slavery was defended as a God-given institution. And the support for that was readily available in the Holy Bible. The verses were there, and you didn't have to twist them and take them out of context, that supported slavery. And the same thing with women, the same thing with lack of freedom of religion. I know everyone in this room has already heard over and over again that the First Commandment and the First Amendment are in direct contradiction with each other. Thou shalt have no other gods before me doesn't square too well with this idea of religious freedom, whatever your religious beliefs are. And related to that, it's also very clear in the Bible that blasphemy is unacceptable. It's actually described as the one unforgivable sin. You can be forgiven for rape and murder and pillaging and so forth, but you can't be forgiven for blaspheming the Holy Spirit. And all of that, of course, is related to, you're not allowed to walk away from your religious beliefs to change them, whatever they are. In a secular government, secular society, you can have religious beliefs, you can change those religious beliefs, but the government and the whole society are not going to be engaged in punishing you for that, for saying the wrong thing about religion, or for changing your mind, even if it's just changing it from Baptist or Presbyterian. That's your business, that's your decision. We have individual liberty, we do not have a government endorsement of or support for religion. There are a lot of people who make this Christian nation argument that they think it is a Christian nation because they don't want you or Muslims or other forms of Christians or Jews to have the freedom to make a different idea, and they want the government on their side. And our framers, our founding fathers, and they were nearly all males, not females, because of the, I don't think it's directly because they were Christians, but that reinforced it to the extent that they were Christians. Those framers understood that there are very serious dangers to identifying a nation with a particular religious point of view. They were not trying to establish an atheist nation. There is nothing in our Constitution that is supposed to give atheists any advantage, and as a secularist and as a strong supporter of the Secular Coalition for America, I don't want there to be anything in our governing states, cities, counties that favors atheism. I want, if it favors evolution, I want it to favor evolution because that's what the scientists have told us makes sense. And if it favors using medicine rather than prayer for healing, I don't want that to be an attack on the Christian scientist, and I don't want to support the Christian scientist. I want to make the decision based on what the best medical knowledge we have for our children. And if an adult wants to engage in faith healing and turn away from medicine and the placebo effect too, and maybe the placebo effect comes with the faith healing, an adult has a right to do that. They don't have a right to do that to their children, and we've certainly shifted when we do that sort of thing. The history that's involved in this is grossly distorted by our opponents, our enemies, and the ignorant folk who truly don't understand the issues. We did not spring full-blown as a democratic republic. We had a long period of ferment and unhappiness. We established a revolution, as I said. Many important parts of it started very close to here. The Declaration of Independence does have some theistic references, but those are references to nature's God. There are actually no Christian ideas as part of the Declaration of Independence. And the Declaration of Independence is not our governing charter. It was written in 1776. It set off the war, the Revolutionary War. The war ended. We governed ourselves not under the Constitution of the United States, but under Articles of Confederation. And it was not until those didn't work very well that we actually got some 11, 12 years later from the Declaration of Independence, we got the Constitution. And the Constitution of the United States is a godless document. It literally does not say anything about religion except that there shall be no religious test to hold public office, Article 6 of the Constitution. And in the First Amendment it says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. The emphasis was on restricting government, not on restricting individuals. It was not an anti-Christian or anti-theistic document. It was an anti-government document and a support of individual freedom for individuals. And when I want us to stop being defensive when we argue with a Christian nation, folks. I want us to say, wait a minute, you're wrong about this being a Christian nation. And you are wrong about it being in your own best interest to think that it is, or to act in support of that idea. It is dangerous to you if you let, I love the last thing that Andy had about Governor Perry. If you live in Texas and you let Governor Perry decide what counts as being a good Christian, even if you happen to agree with him on whatever particular idiocy he's engaged in his latest pronouncement, you're endangering your own religious liberty. You're endangering your own sense of what it means to be a good Christian. And you ought to be on our side. You're not going to join with the Secular Coalition for America or American Atheist or Atheist Alliance in trying to promote atheism and not believing in any gods. We think that's right, and we'd like to persuade you of that. But you should join us in understanding that secularism is in your best interest. Now, there are four basic ideas or principles that I think underlie secularism. And if I'm arguing with a person who wants the government to be considered Christian, I say, look, if you can convince me that any of these four ideas are incorrect, I'll back off and I'll concede the argument to you. But if you can't convince me, if all four of these are things that you agree with me on, then you must also, in my opinion, agree with me that we need and should have and should protect a secular nation. And the four ideas are not very complicated. You can take notes if you want to, but you don't really need to. You'll remember them. The first is that we Americans, actually applies to all human beings, but we Americans don't all agree on religion. We disagree in some very important ways. I don't think there is a God. You think there is some sort of a God. I don't think that there's that the Virgin Mary was in fact born a virgin too, or whatever any of that stuff is. And you think that's important. Well, okay, we don't agree, and it's not just trivial things. Dunking versus on the forehead when it comes to baptism may be trivial to somebody, but to somebody else it's worth killing folks over. We disagree on religion. We disagree in really important ways. The second idea is that human judgment is fallible. Now, I didn't say anything about divine judgment. I don't think there is a God, so obviously I don't think there's any divine judgment, and so it can't be fallible. But you can believe God is infallible if you wish. But every human being that I know of on reflection agrees that human judgment. We make mistakes. We make mistakes about really important stuff, and not just whether there's a gallon of milk on the top shelf. We make mistakes. We elect the wrong person in retrospect as governor of Texas, or as our state legislator, or as or we change our minds about whether a piece of legislation should be supported or not supported. We are fallible. And even the Catholic Church, even when it's talking about the Pope and his infallibility, the infallibility doctrine is only with respect to official doctrine that he puts in a papal bull, and not in the rest of his life. He's actually a fallible human being too. The third item, and this is maybe the one that has been most misunderstood and abused in the course of human history, is that religious truth, whatever you decide, whatever you think religious truth really constitutes, that there is no God, that there's a triune God, whatever, religious truth cannot be arrived at by voting or by force. Now, obviously, there are plenty of instances in world history where an army has moved into an area and the next generation of people in that area now adopt the religion that the army wanted them to adopt. Islam, Christianity, there have been all sorts of examples of this. But you can't actually change somebody's mind and belief by force. You can change what they will say and what they will do, and that in turn can change what their children will believe, and maybe even eventually what they will believe. But the force direct will not change it. And as Americans, we certainly don't think you can change by voting. And if all of you were Christian preachers, I would say, look, if I propose that the Trinity is or is not an important issue, and we take a vote on it, and 99% of the people in this room, 94% of the people in this room, disagree with you, will that lead you to change your mind? No. We all understand that religious truth is not amenable to voting. It's not amenable to force. So you think you're right about religion, and you want to convince somebody else, then you have to convince them. You have to find some way. It doesn't have to be a logical argument. It might be an emotional thing. But you have to persuade them that their religious view is incorrect and that yours is correct. You can't do it by just passing a new law. And the fourth item is a peculiarly American one, and that is that religious liberty is worth protecting. Liberty of an individual, of every human being, has a right to have his or her own conscience, his or her own ideas about ultimate reality in the sense that these people think ultimate reality is divine, but also about other things. We believe in individual liberty. And if you believe in individual liberty, and if you don't accept that you can change religious ideas by force or by voting, and if you understand that human judgment is fallible, and if you understand that all Americans, in fact, all of anything, you can take a suburb of Mecca in Saudi Arabia, all of those people are allegedly fundamentalist Muslims, and if they change their mind about it, somebody technically can cut their head off. Occasionally they actually cut their head off. There'll still be differences among them, important differences in their opinion. They may not express it, but there will be actual differences. If you take those four things together, you must see that the only alternative is to limit government, keep government out of it, and support a secular government. The evidence for this and the details of what Thomas Jefferson said and what Newt Gingrich said, and how there's some reason maybe to contrast those two things, and all of the other historical facts are important, and there are all kinds of arguments that get involved in this. But the basic idea really is, and we shouldn't be defensive about this, we should be offensive. We should say, this is the American ideal. You're a good American, you're a good patriotic American. We want you to join us. Now, I've paid no attention to time, and I have no idea how much time I have. I didn't even start my timer. So, have we got any questions? Yes.
What is the subject?
If they've asked me to please wait until you get a microphone. Okay, now.
Okay. One of the subjects I've heard brought up in this argument about the Christian nation is the idea that the U.S. government printed a Bible at one point early on.
Yeah.
And I really didn't know what to say to that.
Well, first of all, the Bible is a book. It is a cultural and artifact of our civilization. It is certainly, if we could have Bible studies taught fairly in high schools, I would be in favor of course in the Bible, because it is a rich and interesting part of our language, of our understanding, of our history. It's also full of absolutely horrible stuff, as well as some really backward ideas about women, about religious liberty, and so forth. So there are some very good reasons why I think we should have the Bible taught. Now, the people who, and Thomas Jefferson was one of them, who supported having the savages, American Indians, be taught and printing up some of this Bible. I'd have to know all their motives, and there's probably no way I can know what their actual motives were. It's also true that the timing of some of these things varies. Some of the things that they're very proud that the government did actually preceded the Constitution rather than being under the Constitution. For example, one of the very last acts, the last significant act that Congress took under the Articles of Confederation was the establishment of the Northwest Territories. Now, for those of you who are from Poland, Northwest, under the Northwest Territories, did not refer to Washington and Oregon and Idaho. It referred to Ohio, or the area that is now Ohio and Michigan and Indiana. And that legislation designated that there should be some space set aside for churches. That was not under the U.S. Constitution. It was the last act of the Congress before. So you have to look at the whole reach of history and not just at one specific thing. And the weight of history is clearly, and another example that's similar to that is the business with chaplains. There were congressional chaplains before there was a Constitution. And James Madison, the father of the Constitution, wrote about this and said, de minimis lex, it's not worth arguing over. It's clearly unfair that, for example, in his day and age, it would be impossible for a Catholic to be named as a chaplain. It's clearly not fair or reasonable under our principles, but this precedent, it'd be too much trouble to mess with it, we'll leave it alone. I think he was wrong about it being de minimis lex. And now we taxpayers are paying big salaries for congressional chaplains, and there was more justification for having a chaplain for the military when in fact you took men, they were nearly all men then, away from their homes and away from their pastors and their sources of comfort and support. Maybe you had to have some way of giving them some of that when they were on the road. If that's true, then we should certainly have atheist, or at least humanist chaplains in the military now. And there are some efforts underway to get that happen. I probably over-answered your question, but did I at least answer your question? And I think the next question was right behind. I don't know how much time we have, but let me ask, before you ask your question, if you have a question that you know now that you want to ask, would you raise your hand and keep it up for just a moment? Okay. And remember the number that I give you. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. And that way I won't have to remember who raised their hand. Those 4 will be next after this one.
So just to clarify this, the Articles of Confederation didn't have anything close to the Establishment Clause?
Not really. I'm not an expert on the Articles of Confederation. There was some at least vaguely religious language. Most of the state constitutions, actually, of the colonies then, that preceded the U.S. Constitution, did have invocations, and some of them had requirements. The Constitution of the state of South Carolina said you cannot hold public office of any sort if you don't believe in Almighty God. That has been overturned thanks to Herb Silverman, our friend and ally, and essentially the founder of the Secular Coalition for America. First he ran for governor to try to challenge that, and he lost the race for governor, probably in part because he was asked, what's the first thing you'll do if you're elected? He said, demand a recount. But he lost the race, and the courts held, well, you don't have standing to challenge the Constitution because you didn't win the race. So his book is very much worth buying, Candidate Without a Prayer, and he gives you the full, it's a very funny and interesting tale. He has his notary public certificate on his door of his office, or he did, I think he may be retired now. And students have asked him, why do you have that up there and not your PhD in mathematics? He said, it took me longer to get that one. So anyway, Herb's a good guy, and these constitutional provisions are clearly not constitutional under the U.S. Constitution. Some of them have been overturned, and I'm assuming all of them would be if given the chance. Actually, the South Carolina Supreme Court is the one that overturned it, much to Herb's delight, and that's part of his story too. But I'll let him do those Q&A. Anyway, I'm not an expert on the Articles of Confederation, but they didn't work out very well, mostly nothing to do with the there was much controversy and unhappiness over religion and whether religion should be a part of our government from the beginning. I mean, Thomas Jefferson was accused of being an atheist when he ran for president by his enemies. He was not an atheist. I would prefer that he was, but he wasn't. But this notion of religious correctness and religious truth, I mean, there were articles in the newspapers when Jefferson ran in 1800 that said your only choice is to vote for John Adams and God or vote for Thomas Jefferson and we're all going straight to hell. I'm paraphrasing just a touch, but not much, not much. So this argument that we're having, and Jefferson spent a lot of time and energy and writing about whether our laws are based on the Ten Commandments, which he assured us they were not. And he certainly knew his history, and he claimed, this part I don't know that he's right about, even that the laws in England, the rights of an Englishman, didn't come from the Ten Commandments or from Christianity. They came from previous to Christianity. All right, who was, I think you were number one.
Yes, thank you very much.
Sure.
Sue Cohut, and came up here from Northern Virginia yesterday. So my question is, the quick question is your view of Novus Ordo Seclorum that appears on our currency,
Yes.
and then the second one about the property tax issues that the churches benefit from.
Okay, sure. Be happy to talk about both of those. Novus Ordo, I don't know exactly how you pronounce it. It is, I think, Latin. It's on the currency, along with on your dollar bills, but not on mine, in God we trust. And there are those, it's not on mine because I mark it out on all mine. I'm obsessed. And I'm here to tell you with great regret that it is perfectly legal for you to mark it out. I wish that it were an act of civil disobedience. I would like to test it in court. But I actually called up the Secret Service, who are in charge of these things, and the Secret Service assured me that as an American citizen, I have a right to write on the dollar bill almost anything I want. I can't put commercial message, and I can't write on there something, this is a $100 bill when it's a $1 bill. But something about fraud. Anyway, you can mark it out. You can put a religious motto. You can put a Bible verse. You can't put a commercial message. But anyway, Novus Seclorum, the new secular order, or the new order of the world, it was a reference, sort of, to the Enlightenment, but it wasn't. I wish it were a motto that clearly endorsed secular government. It is not, unless you translate it very literally and narrowly. But actually the motto, it's not a bad one as I understand it, but it's not directly supportive of our point of view. It is part of the Great Seal of the United States. This business about In God We Trust, the original committee to decide on a national motto for the United States, which included Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin suggested a motto that included some reference to God. I think it was that opposition to tyranny is support for God, or something like that. And it was turned down. They chose a motto, a pluribus unum, that does not have any religious significance or religious allusion at all. And it was not until after or during the Civil War that we first got the In God We Trust business. We can talk about that a lot more, but let me answer the second part of your question. And the difference between religious organizations, churches, temples, mosques, and so forth, and other nonprofits, when it comes to, you asked about property tax, and I promise I'll get to that. When it comes to the federal income tax, all organizations that are nonprofit get a federal tax exemption for those people who donate money to them, if they are a 501c3 organization. American Atheist is a 501c3 organization. I don't know for sure, but probably Atheist Alliance is. If you give money to an organization like that, you can take a tax deduction for it on your federal income tax, assuming you itemize. And it's the same for a church and a non-church. There is, however, a very, very large difference, and that is that the Red Cross and American Atheist, Atheist Alliance, the Atlanta Free Thought Society, all of those groups must file Form 990s. They have to be accountable. They have to say something about where the money came from and what it's going to be spent on. If you're a church, or a mosque, or a temple, you don't. You can just say, sorry, I'm a church, I'm not telling you. And then you can spend money on your pastor's third helicopter, or his trip to the Bahamas, or this gets a little dicier, but you can spend money supporting political candidates in some indirect ways, which is supposedly illegal under that Internal Revenue Code, but it's hard to enforce it when you can't do any accountability. So there's some very serious problems with the national federal code. Those problems are not really whether or not churches are taxed, but whether they're accountable. It's a little bit complicated and hard to make the average person understand some of this. But you asked about property tax. Property tax is a local matter. And a state, it's a preacher of the state, which is the city or the county and so forth, that decides on property taxes. And they vary in all the jurisdictions. So most of the states, most of the counties, most of the cities in the U.S. are very likely to give a property tax exemption to all sorts of religious houses of worship. Some of them also give property tax exemptions to some other categories of nonprofit organizations. In Georgia, which is the one I'm most familiar with, that's where I live, because my wife's the treasurer of the Atlanta Free Thought Society, you can get a tax exemption if you're a veterans organization, or a Masons, or things like that for your property, or if you're a school. But Atlanta Free Thought Society is a 501c3 educational organization, but we're not a school. And so we cannot get a property tax exemption, and we pay substantial, I guess our biggest expense. We don't pay our president or our treasurer or anything like that. Never have had a part-time employee, much less full-time. And our biggest expense is property tax. Is that fair? Well, it's grossly unfair if you really think the government should stay out of religion, as I do. And I certainly am in favor of, the shorthand for this is tax the churches, but as I say, that kind of misrepresents some of what should be done. What I would say is every nonprofit organization, religious or irreligious or anti-religious, must be treated the same under local, state, and county, and of course, federal law. And we're a long way from that. So, all right, that was number one, and I see some other people raising hands, but let me go to number two. You'll be, oh, I gotta quit soon.
5 minutes.
5 minutes, all right.
Okay, I'll try and make this quick. As you pointed out in the early part of your talk, the word secular is one of those flip-flop words.
Yeah.
Sometimes, secularum, the world, sometimes it refers to the political position of separation of church and state, and sometimes it refers to the philosophical position of we are atheists, we believe only in this world and not in others.
Yes.
How do you feel about some organizations, say, such as the Secular Coalition of America, which is kind of straddling combining the two? It is an atheist organization promoting from atheists. The whole point is that we are atheists speaking out for the secular point of view, which is the political one. But because it kind of straddles the two, I don't want to single out just that organization, but I see flip-flopping back and forth. And of course, the religious right can use, well, if you're a secular person, that means you're an atheist. Therefore, you should be against the separation of church and state. What do you think?
I think that the word in the Secular Coalition for America and in general in the things that I talk about, the word has both meanings. I think we need to be complicated and subtle enough to recognize and to say that. The Secular Coalition for America is about to come out with a model guide for policy to give to state legislators, and in it is going to say, I know because I did the last edit of it, it is going to say we are not trying to persuade you, Mr. or Ms. legislator, city councilman, school board member, to support our non-theism. We are instead and exclusively trying to convince you that government should stay out of the religion business. And that's what we mean by secular in this context. Now, the Secular Coalition for America and the organizations that it represents are also very strong advocates for secularism in the other sense. And I don't think you have to choose. I think you have to say, hey, it means different things under different circumstances. I don't want the federal government deciding what the doctrines of the Baptist church down the street are going to be, but I don't want the Baptist church to get away with special treatment. No special rights for Christians. All right, I'm running quickly out of time. Oh, well, you can't ask any questions. You're going to be up here answering all of them tomorrow. Go ahead, Alicia.
You just said that the government should keep its hands out of religion. I don't think that's entirely easy and simple as you
it's
make
not
it seem.
simple, no.
Because there's the idea of religious liberty, freedom of religion, has to have some government-imposed limitations. For
Yes.
example, you cannot have a prayer meeting in the middle of a crowded freeway.
Yeah.
The argument that the Catholics and the evangelicals have used that there's an individual religious right of conscience to refuse contraception and health insurance and
Sure.
abortion and all those
Sure.
sort of things. So freedom of religion cannot be absolute. There has to be ways in which a social understanding supersedes religious conscience. For example, child labor laws and all
So
sorts
there
of things.
are thousands of examples, and you're quite correct that we can't have an absolute freedom of religion, but we can have as an ideal that the government will stay out of religious decisions. Now, that doesn't mean that the government will stay out of any decision that an individual or an organization decides is a religious question. If I want evolution taught in the science classes, I can't say, well, we want evolution taught in the science classes because my religious point of view, my atheism, is opposed to teaching creationism. You have to say, this is the best science. This is what the people who do science have concluded fits best with science education. And the same thing is true for all these other. There are all sorts of exceptions. You can believe anything you want. You cannot do anything you want. And the limitation has to be not based on somebody else's belief, but on a practical social good that is decided in a democratic way in this country. So you're right, and if anyone thought I was trying to make it into something very straightforward and simple, it isn't. It almost never is. And this has been going on for over 200 years. This is not a new argument. You were number 3, or I think, where's number 4? I forgot who that was.
Is that all? I think that was number 4.
Yeah.
We done?
I don't know.
I can skip it if you want. I can talk later.
Well, I'll be around the rest of the day and tomorrow in the morning, so ask questions one-on-one. Thanks.